Hi, peace be upon you, folks. Today I'd like to talk about Allah, the name Allah. Now, you hear a lot of Christians say it's a new God, like the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, brought up a new God. Who is this Allah? Where did Allah come from? And it's so weird that this is even an argument. You know, it's sad, I think, that people choose to argue not on the basis of knowledge or truth or finding out the truth, but basically just throwing something out there and then convincing other people to accept it without any logical argument. And yet people puts this forward. And the Quran talks about such things like people who argue for the sake of argument. It's like when a prophet brings the truth, the people who are benefiting in society, especially the elite, when they want to go against these teachings, they present different arguments. For example, before the prophet was granted prophethood, he was known as the trustworthy. Nobody ever heard a lie from him. Nobody ever said, oh, we couldn't trust him with something. In fact, even if you don't like him, you would you would trust him with your property because you know he's going to give it to you back in full. All right? So when he started preaching about oneness of God and the fact that you should not have idols, the elders, the chiefs, they started terming him as, for example, a madman. That was one of the things. But even that, they knew he wasn't mad. He spoke with wisdom. He spoke with sense. Then they termed him a soothsayer. But these people were familiar with soothsayers, and he didn't sound like a soothsayer. Then they termed him a poet. This was a culture of recitation and poetry. People were aware of poetry. They knew what poetry was, but this was not poetry. So they were presenting this just on the sake of arguments to discredit him, not on the sake of this is what he's saying and this is why it's wrong. You know, if you say, for example, they would say, let's say, for example, they say resurrection, and they said, no, that can't be. There can't be no hereafter. How can you claim that those people who are dust and bones are going to be resurrected? Then now you've presented at least something of an argument that you're not just throwing it out there, but you're saying this is why I think this is wrong. And then the Quran actually responds to something like that. It says, what did God create you in the first place with? A sperm drop. Now, if God could create you from a sperm drop into a fetus in a womb and bring you out as a child, develop you as an adult, then what is going to prevent God from creating you the second time? God created the heavens and the earth. Are you more complicated than the heavens and the earth? So these were logical arguments. Like, what if you deny the hereafter after those arguments? It's just maybe because you want to stay on the path of following your desires. You don't want to reform your life. You don't want to submit to the will of God. So they would say Allah is a new God. Well, that doesn't make any sense because Allah is just Arabic for God. In a Christian Bible that the Arabs use because they are Arab Christians, the word for God is Allah. In a Jewish Torah, because they are Arabs that are Jews, the word for God is Allah. Allah is just Arabic for God. And in fact, Allah, scholars will tell you, is the best name for God. Because in Arabic, God is Ilah. And Ilah is like a deity, something you worship. And it could be anything, it could be your desires. Now Allah is the Ilah, the God, the one worthy of worship. And then the Quran tells you about Abraham, what he said to his people, because his father was a polytheist and his people were pagans. He said, as for me, it is he who created me. That is the one I worship. And the Quran tells you that he left he left that statement for his later generations, so that they would stay on the right path. Because if you have it in the back of your mind that I do not worship anything except the one who created me, the one who sustains my soul, the one who sustains the universe, the one who created everything in existence, the one who is not created, the one who never dies, then how can you be led astray? A lot of people take saints, they take human beings and prophets that have died or resurrected as gods, and they say we supplicate to them so that they could supplicate to God. Uh, First of all, it is God who is going to allow, for example, somebody to intercede for you. And we have put our weaknesses and our imperfections upon God. And we've thought that certain people who we think are saints, God didn't send down any authority. God didn't send any authority to say, make this a saint, make that a saint. None of the prophets prayed to saints. So where do we get this idea of saints from? Now, some people have the idea that you pray to the saint. When the saint intercedes for you, God cannot refuse his intercession. Think about that for a minute. God, who is the most just, is the most knowing. He taught the prophets, or these people you call saints, the knowledge that they have. They cannot be as just as God. What is it about them? Why, in fact, would they intercede for somebody who God doesn't permit? If you follow those saints, those that you call saints and the prophets, the first thing you would do, it's not, or I don't want to say the first, but one of the important things you would do is not pray to them, not supplicate to them, because they never told you to do that. So where did you get that teaching from? So how can you not follow what the prophets have taught, yet think that you would benefit from their intercession? How does that make sense? What is your thinking? What is your idea about God that you would think you would be allowed intercession by disobeying God, yet because you supplicate to people that are dearer to God, they would intercede for you. You've proven yourself to be an enemy of God because you've gone against the teachings of God. Yet you think these people who are dear to God would love you even though God doesn't love you? Think about it. That doesn't make any sense. So Allah, the scholars have said this is the best name for God because it is the deity, the one worthy of worship. Not Ilah, but Allah, the God. All right. Now the Meccans, the people of Mecca, they have several gods. They have several ilahs. And when God says, for example, in the Quran, some people say, like the people who want to talk about the Trinity, they will say, well, God says in the Quran, we. Well, even in Hebrew tradition, God says, for example, they say, for example, Elohim. Elohim, the im is plural, but it doesn't mean God is plural. All right. It's a different type of plural. It's not a plural of multiplicity. It's a plural. It's like a royal we. When God, for example, talks about him and his angels, because God is not going to come down and start making things. He has servants. The angels are basically his hands. So when he says we, he talks about the royal we. But when God says, for example, in the Quran, your Lord, he doesn't use that as plural. So that's that for that explanation. But Allah is not a new God. How is it not a new God? Well, let's look at the teachings. Forget about who was in the idol, who they kept as idol in the Kaaba. Let's look at the teachings. All right? Because if you say this is God, his name is, let's give him a name. His name is John. He lived on earth these years. He fell sick at one time. He died at this time. This is who we worship. This was God who came on earth. Well, there's an error right there. You've named this person as John. This was God, yet he fell sick and he died. So there are errors with that. So you can't just say, this is God, and I've named him, and I've given him these attributes, and he resembles one of the creations of God. He has arms and legs and mouth. So Allah is the one who created all things. And Allah is not something you can make an image of and worship it. By knowing a God, by knowing if this is the truth, you have to study what it says about this God. If it says something false about this God, then you know that's not the God I should worship. If they say, for example, this is a God. One time he gave up his eye so that he could gain knowledge. Well, if he's not all knowing, then how is he God? How does that even make sense? Why would a God be have a defect? So if you want to learn about who Allah is, it's about learning about the teachings in Islam. What does Islam say about Allah? Now, I think the people who have the closest relationship or the closest interpretation of Allah as the Muslims do is the Jews. Because even when the Jews say this is the Son of God, they do not mean he's like divine. It's just part of their literature where they mean he's been anointed, he's been appointed for prophethood. But like the Muslims, the Jews do not attribute equals or partners with God. And even Jesus, the Bible tells you, especially the Gospel of Thomas, it tells you that Jesus said, God is whole. We came from what is whole. So you can't be like dividing God into this and that and that. And even the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, in a hadith, which are the sayings of the Prophet, he says, God is indivisible. By conclusion, he's one without any partners because he's indivisible, he's whole. God is the absolute. So you can't say he's made up of two distinct persons or three distinct persons, they're equally God, or some teaching like that. And some people will tell you, well, the Trinity is like it's like water. It can be liquid water, it can be solid ice, it can be vapor, gas. They say that's like God. Well, why only three? God created so many other things. God created the spirit. So why only Trinity? God created other animals, even mankind. So how do you decide that these are the three forms of God? The Father, the Spirit, and the Son. And if you say one is not all knowing, then how is he God? And the Christians, the Bible will tell you that Jesus said he doesn't know the hour of resurrection. Only God knows the hour. Only the Father knows the hour. So the Father is all knowing. The Father is the one who is God. All right? Who is it that sends the others? Does the Spirit send the Father to go do something? Does the Son send the Father to go do something? They say it's the Father who sends the Son, right? To come and preach. The Father is the one who taught the Son the message to preach the message. And the Son says he doesn't do what he wills, but he does the will of the Father. So who's the authority here? Who is it that sends while no one sends him? Who is it that provides for you while you don't provide for him? So just by the teachings of God, you can learn who the true God is. And the Islam, they tell you that God is free of need. God is not susceptible to need in things. He created everything. He's not in need of space and time for his existence. He's not in need of food for his survival. He created every single thing. And God is the one that everything is dependent on. The attribute for that in Islam is as-Samad. Everything is dependent on him and he's dependent on nothing. He's the ever-living who never dies. So it's not like he died and he could be resurrected. He never dies. He's the ever-living. He sustains the whole universe. He doesn't even sleep. So why is he going to die? Who's going to sustain the universe while he's dead? Come on, people. So the new God is not Allah. In fact, the new God is the Trinitarian God. All right? Allah is just Arabic for God, and it's the best name for God because it means the deity, the one worthy of worship in the heavens and the earth, the only deity in the heavens and the earth. And even in Aramaic, which Jesus spoke, and you can't even find a Bible that's older than the current Bibles that's in Aramaic or Hebrew. So it's like, that's a doubt right there. But even in Aramaic, which Jesus spoke, the word for God is Allah or Allah. So Arabic, Aramaic, Hebrew, Hebrew and Arabic, they all got, basically people say they got from Aramaic. Aramaic is their root language. Some people think Aramaic, in fact, is the very first language ever. the language maybe that Adam spoke. And the word for God is Allah or Allah. So Allah is not a new word. Allah has been used before. And the Christians, even before the Prophet Muhammad, the Christians who lived in Mecca or the Jews who lived in Mecca, they used the word Allah for God. So I don't know how much more should be said on this subject. It's not something I would even think that would have been an issue that should be spoken about in this way. But so that's that. Hope you. I wish you good luck in your search for truth.